members of a mysterious religious sect hid a collection of over 900 sacred scrolls in caves in the Judean desert bordering the Dead Sea.
Artificial intelligence just looked at 5,000 Hebrew letters in the Dead Sea Scrolls. What it found made experts question everything. The AI spotted 50 different scribes where humans only saw 10. Some texts were being written during the exact events they describe, not centuries later like everyone believed. But the real shock came when infrared cameras revealed hidden writing underneath. The scrolls weren't just copied. They were edited, hidden, and layered with secrets. Now, we finally know why. First, let's talk about the Enoch, which is built on something truly incredible. It uses BiNet neural network technology, a powerful kind of artificial intelligence that looks at ancient writing in a way no human ever could. This system doesn't just see what's on the surface. It looks at microscopic patterns in the ink, breaking down every tiny curve and stroke made by a scribe thousands of years ago. It focuses on two things. One is the way each stroke curves, like tracing the exact twist of a writer's hand. The other is the shape of the letters themselves. Enoch studies these shapes so closely that it can spot details no paleographer could ever hope to see. For example, in the Great Isaiah Scroll, Enoch examined over 5,000 alephs. What it found settled a debate that had lasted for decades. It showed clearly that two different scribes worked on that scroll. The AI could see tiny changes where one scribe's work ended and another began. It could even map how writing styles changed over the centuries. Before Enoch, this kind of detail was unimaginable. But that's not all. Enoch can predict the age of a Dead Sea Scroll within 30 years. That's shocking because the usual methods often miss the mark by centuries. Scholars have always had to rely on looking at the style of handwriting and guessing the date. It's slow. It's imprecise. Enoch changed that. The system was trained on 24 scrolls that had already been radiocarbon dated. That gave it a solid base. When researchers tested it on 135 more scrolls, Enoch's predictions matched expert opinions 79% of the time. Even better, its margin of error was between 27.9 and 30.7 years compared to radiocarbon dating. That's incredibly precise. Sometimes, it dated scrolls much older than experts thought. Take fragments of the Book of Daniel. Enoch showed they were from between 230 and 160 BCE. That lined up perfectly with the period when the author is believed to have lived. Enoch didn't just provide dates. It reshaped the history of biblical writing. Training Enoch wasn't easy. The work was led by the European Research Council's project called The Hands That Wrote the Bible. The team picked 24 scrolls with dates confirmed by radiocarbon testing. They scanned these scrolls in extreme detail, using multispectral imaging to make sure they captured the true ink patterns without interference from the background. The learning method they chose was Bayesian ridge regression. That's a way of teaching AI that doesn't just give a single date. It shows a full curve of probabilities. This is vital because ancient scrolls are often damaged or incomplete. The AI learns to work with uncertainty and still give an accurate age. For a long time, people believed that the Great Isaiah Scroll was written by just one scribe. That made sense. After all, the handwriting on this ancient manuscript looked so neat and uniform from start to finish. The scroll is huge, 54 columns, 17 sheets of parchment, and about 7.34 meters long, which is nearly 24 feet. It's one of the oldest and most complete biblical manuscripts ever found, dating back to around 125 BCE. But in 2021, everything changed. A team at the University of Groningen used artificial intelligence to study the scroll in a way no human could. The AI didn't just glance at the letters, it examined over 5,000 examples of the Hebrew letter Aleph alone. It measured tiny curves, angles, and pen strokes that no one had noticed before. The result was shocking. What seemed like the work of one scribe turned out to be the work of two. The AI found that the switch happened right in the middle of the scroll. Around columns 27 to 29, a second scribe took over. The change matched a break in the scroll itself, a 3-line gap, and a new piece of parchment sewn onto the old one. The AI showed this wasn't just a guess. The first and second parts of the scroll formed two clear clusters when the data was mapped out. Even though the second scribe tried hard to copy the first, small differences gave him away. His writing had a bit more variation. Maybe he was younger. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he just had a different hand. Either way, this discovery upended what experts had believed for decades. What made this so surprising was that no human paleographer had ever spotted the change. Generations of handwriting experts studied the scroll and all agreed it had to be from one scribe. They looked for clues. They debated tiny features, but they always hit a dead end. The human eye just can't process thousands of letter shapes stretched over meters of parchment. The AI, though, could. It looked at every curve, every stroke, and every bit of pressure in the ink. It grouped similar shapes, found patterns, and uncovered what humans missed. This showed how AI could give us new facts about ancient texts that no one could argue with. The AI did something even more impressive. It could tell the difference between normal changes, like what happens when a scribe gets tired or changes tools, and what happens when a whole new person picks up the pen. It studied the way the ink was laid down, the angle of the pen, the pressure used. It saw that the second scribe had more variation in his writing. That might mean he had less practice, or maybe he worked under different conditions. But he still kept the style close to the first scribes, probably because of shared training or deliberate copying. The researchers even tested the AI by adding random noise to the data. The result stayed the same. There were two scribes. This finding matters even more because of what the scroll is. The Great Isaiah Scroll holds the oldest full version of the Book of Isaiah. It's about 1,000 years older than any other complete Hebrew copy. Found in 1947 by Bedouin shepherds in Qumran Cave 1, the scroll contains all 66 chapters of Isaiah, with only a little damage. It has helped scholars confirm how accurate the Hebrew Bible stayed over centuries. Now, we know it was written by at least two scribes who worked so closely together that only AI could tell them apart. This shows just how organized scribes were in 2nd century BCE Judea. They worked as teams, trained to match each other's style, and kept the biblical tradition alive for us to study today. For years, people thought only a small group of scribes, maybe fewer than 10, wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. This idea came from experts looking at handwriting with their eyes, but that method was limited. It often missed details and left room for mistakes. Now, artificial intelligence has changed everything. Using advanced technology, researchers found more than 50 different scribes who worked on the scrolls. This is a huge jump from what scholars believed before. The AI looked at tiny things no human eye could see, like how much pressure the scribes used, how their strokes curved, and how the ink flowed on the parchment. These small clues told a big story. It showed that the scrolls were not the work of a few people hidden away, but the product of a large, organized group. This group copied and edited sacred texts with care, and they did it far earlier than experts thought, up to 200 years before the usual timeline. One of the key figures behind this discovery was Dr. Shira Feigenbaum-Golovin from Tel Aviv University. Her team used powerful computer programs to spot different writing styles and hidden edits. These details had been missed for decades. What they found turned old ideas upside down. The scrolls weren't made by a small, closed group. Instead, they came from a lively community where many people worked together. There may even have been a scribal school, with scribes learning from one another and helping shape texts that later became central to Jewish and Christian faiths. Some of the changes they found in the scrolls might reflect shifts in beliefs or reactions to major events of their time. A major breakthrough came from combining handwriting studies with computer science. At the University of Groningen, Professor Mladen Popovic and Professor Lambert Schomacher led the way. They built AI tools that went beyond looking at letters. The software studied how the scribes moved their hands, how fast they wrote, and the slight bends in each letter. One letter, the Aleph, appeared more than 5,000 times in the Great Isaiah Scroll. The AI analyzed every single one, spotting tiny differences that matched the muscle movements of individual scribes. No human could study so much data or notice such fine details. Thanks to this technology, we can now see the work of scribes who lived over 2,000 years ago, as if their hands left a hidden signature on the page. The most surprising part of this research is what it says about how the scrolls were made. People used to think that scribes worked alone, carefully copying texts in silence. But the AI showed something else. In some scrolls, like the Great Isaiah Scroll, two scribes worked on the same columns, matching each other's style so the text looked seamless. This hints at a workshop setting, where scribes worked side by side, possibly under a master's guidance. It points to an organized team effort, rather than lonely scribes working in isolation. This discovery gives us a fresh picture of ancient Judea. It shows that teamwork and shared responsibility were at the heart of preserving their sacred writings. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not just old texts sitting in a museum. They tell a living story of change. For over 200 years, scribes kept editing and correcting these scrolls. They used different inks, styles of handwriting, and even languages. Some scrolls, like the Community Rule, were touched by many hands over the centuries. Each generation felt it had the right to update the words, to rethink the laws, and to shape the beliefs. This shows that these writings were not set in stone. They were part of a culture where debate and revision were common. Some changes even match major events, like the rise of new religious groups or changes in rituals. The scrolls give us a clear view of how ideas and rules were always shifting in the world of Second Temple Judaism. The surprises didn't end there. When scientists pointed powerful cameras and X-rays at the scrolls, they found secrets hidden under the visible ink. Many scrolls turned out to be palimpsests. This means the scribes had erased older writings and written new ones on top. In 2018, researchers looking at a blank piece of parchment from Cave 11 discovered faint Hebrew writing that could only be seen with infrared light. Beneath the surface were older versions of scripture, different readings, and sometimes even unrelated texts, like calendars or legal notes. This happened because parchment was so valuable that people reused it. By doing so, they kept layers of history trapped in a single piece of material. But not all hidden words were about religion. Some of the erased texts held surprises. In 2020, scientists using spectral imaging found an ancient chart tracking the sun and moon cycles. This helped people plan festivals. On another fragment, they spotted what looked like a personal prayer. A scribe had quietly written his own thoughts, right alongside sacred texts. This shows that the people of Qumran cared not only about holy writings, but also about science and personal reflection. The scrolls weren't just about religion. They captured the curiosity, struggles, and feelings of the people who made them. Finally, the edits themselves give us clues about how beliefs changed over time. The scrolls show shifts in rules about purity, the Sabbath, and ideas about a future Messiah. In the Damascus document, AI tools found small changes in legal wording that matched changes in how the community built their ritual baths. Around 50 BCE, they added new mikvehs. These updates in both text and practice show that the people of Qumran were trying to deal with new challenges. They were adapting, debating, and sometimes disagreeing. For a long time, people believed the Book of Daniel was written long after the events it describes. Scholars said it was written during the Maccabean crisis, between 168 and 165 BCE. This made many think its prophecies were not real predictions, but history disguised as prophecy. Then came the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among them were fragments of Daniel, like 4Q Daniel C, that shocked experts. These pieces date back to the late 2nd century BCE, around 2300 years ago. That is almost the time Daniel is said to have lived. This means these manuscripts were not just old copies made long after the book was written. They were created during or soon after the lifetime of the author. That is incredibly rare for any part of the Bible. It shows the book of Daniel was valued and shared right away. One scholar compared this to how close the Rylands papyrus of the Gospel of John is to its original. Suddenly, the idea that Daniel was written much later seems much weaker. These scrolls show that people were already reading and treasuring Daniel's words during the Hellenistic struggles of the time. The timeline has changed in a big way. A mix of artificial intelligence and radiocarbon dating pushed the dates of many scrolls back by as much as 150 years. Before, most of these texts were thought to be from between 150 and 50 BCE. Now, some are as early as 230 BCE or even from the late 3rd century BCE. That means parts of Daniel and other writings were being copied during the very events they describe. The AI, called Enoch, looked at 135 scrolls in high detail. It matched human experts and carbon tests 79 to 85% of the time. This discovery brings these ancient writers closer to us. Their work was not just the result of later reflection. They were recording their thoughts as their world was changing. It shows Jewish writers were active and creative much earlier than anyone thought. The story of Second Temple Judaism is being rewritten as a result. There was another surprise, too. Scholars used to think that Jewish script styles changed in a straight line. First came Hasmonian script, then Herodian script replaced it. But the scrolls tell a different story. Both styles existed together as early as 175 to 150 BCE. This means scribes had choices. They could use different scripts for different reasons, maybe depending on where they lived, what group they belonged to, or who their rulers were. It paints a picture of a lively, diverse literary world. Scribes were not following one single path. They were part of a rich culture full of variety. The new dating also changes how we see the Hasmonean kingdom's literary life. People used to think that copying major texts only started after the Hasmoneans grew stronger. But now we know that scribes were already hard at work before the kingdom's rise. There was already a strong tradition of writing and preserving texts. This means the Hasmoneans built on a foundation that was already there. Jewish identity and culture were taking shape through books and scrolls even before political power came into play. The link between politics and writing is not as simple as once thought. Mladen Popovich, who led the study, called this discovery a time machine. He said it lets us shake hands with people from 2,000 years ago. His team combined AI and radiocarbon dating to create this tool. Now, we can see when these texts were written and imagine the lives of the people who wrote them. The past does not feel so far away anymore. It feels real and close. These findings are not just about Daniel or the Dead Sea Scrolls. They open the door to new ways of studying all kinds of ancient writings. The discovery of the 4Q Daniel C and 4Q Koheleta fragments has changed everything we thought we knew about the history of the Hebrew Bible. These ancient pieces, linked to the Book of Daniel and Ecclesiastes, have been dated using a powerful mix of radiocarbon testing and artificial intelligence handwriting analysis. The results are shocking. The fragments were written in the 2nd and 3rd centuries BCE. That means they could have been copied during the lifetimes of the authors themselves. For Daniel, this pushes the text far closer to the 6th century BCE period that tradition claimed. And for Ecclesiastes, it confirms a 3rd century BCE date that scholars had only guessed. What's even more stunning is that the AI model, called Enoch, narrowed the dating to a 30-year window. This is almost unheard of when dealing with texts over 2,000 years old. These fragments might not just be the oldest surviving copies. They could be the first copies ever made. For decades, people argued that the Old Testament was written centuries after the events it describes. They said it was political, written to support certain rulers or ideas long after the fact. But now, for the first time, we have real proof that at least some biblical texts were written during the periods we always believed. The 4Q Daniel fragment, for example, shows the Book of Daniel was already being shared by 230 BCE. That means the text existed while memories of the events were still fresh, maybe even while the authors were alive. This is huge. It shows these books weren't created through hundreds of years of rewriting or legend. They were recorded as the events happened, or very soon after. The link between faith and archaeology has never been clearer. The Ecclesiastes fragment tells a similar story. Scholars thought the oldest copies came from the 2nd century BCE. But this new dating puts the 4Q Koheleta fragment in the 3rd century BCE, up to 100 years earlier than we thought. This means the deep, thoughtful ideas in Ecclesiastes were being written down and shared much sooner than anyone believed. People were reading and thinking about these words almost as soon as they were spoken. The respect for this text started right at the beginning, with careful copying that helped preserve its wisdom. The most surprising part is that this isn't just true for 1 or 2 books. The AI analysis looked at 135 scrolls. Again and again, it found that these texts were being written during the lifetimes of the people we believe wrote them. This tears down the old belief that the Bible was pieced together long after the fact. Instead, it shows that scribes were writing these words as living documents, recording them while the stories were still new. The AI could date these scrolls within 30 years of accuracy. That's an incredible level of certainty for something so ancient. It means we can trust that these texts give us a direct line back to the time they describe. For hundreds of years, people argued about whether the Bible's traditional timeline was true. Scholars said one thing, and believers said another. Now, for the first time, science backs up what tradition always claimed. The AI model, Enoch, matched handwriting to the right historical periods. It showed that scripts we thought came much later were actually used earlier. This means books like Daniel and Ecclesiastes were written when we always hoped they were. The gap between what we believe and what we can prove has finally been closed. And this new way of dating ancient texts won't just change how we see the Bible. It could change how we understand the whole history of ancient writing and culture. For the first time, tradition and science are telling the same story. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls between 1946 and 1947 in the Qumran caves changed everything we thought we knew about ancient Jewish life. Until then, scholars believed that organized, literate, and deeply religious Jewish communities only appeared around the middle of the 2nd century BCE, during or after the rise of the Hasmonian dynasty. But that belief was wrong. Thanks to artificial intelligence and advanced radiocarbon dating, experts now know that many of the scrolls were written up to 150 years earlier. Some of them even date back to the 3rd century BCE. This means that complex Jewish communities with their own laws, beliefs, and traditions were already thriving long before the Hasmonians came to power. The group linked to these scrolls, often called the Qumran sect or the Essenes, lived together, followed strict rules about purity, and believed the end of the world was near. These ideas and practices existed hundreds of years before the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE. Because of this, historians have had to change their view of how Jewish religion developed. It's now clear that the roots of both Rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity grew out of a much richer and more diverse environment than anyone had guessed. This new timeline affects how we see both Judaism and Christianity. The scrolls prove that by the 3rd century BCE, Jewish groups were already deeply involved in debates about theology, messianic hopes, and how to live as a community. They were holding ritual baptisms, sharing communal meals, and discussing ideas that would later appear in Christian practices. These facts show that Christianity didn't appear out of nowhere. It was part of a bigger picture of Jewish thought and life. One striking example is how the Qumran group divided themselves into 12 tribes, each led by a chief. This sounds a lot like Jesus choosing 12 apostles. It shows how Christian ideas were shaped by earlier Jewish models. The new dating also means that scrolls containing books like Daniel and Ecclesiastes may have been copied while their authors were still alive. That brings us closer than ever to the world where both Judaism and Christianity were born. This forces scholars to rethink the old stories about how these faiths began and how they interacted during the Second Temple period. One of the most surprising discoveries is that a strong scribal culture existed much earlier than people thought. Before, experts believed that Jewish literary activity only took off after the Hasmoneans expanded their power in the 2nd century BCE. But now, thanks to AI analysis of handwriting and precise carbon dating, we know that scribes were active in Judea by the 3rd century BCE. These scribes weren't just copying texts. They were writing, editing, and shaping complex legal and religious works. They produced biblical texts, sectarian rules, hymns, and writings about the end times. This shows that their communities were skilled, organized, and full of religious ideas long before the Hebrew Bible was set in stone. What this means is that Jewish sacred texts didn't appear all at once. They evolved over time, shaped by many generations of scribes who debated, revised, and preserved these writings. Maybe the most amazing thing is that the scrolls show how Jewish texts were living documents. They weren't frozen in time. Communities changed them, added to them, and reshaped them to fit new challenges. The same biblical book could exist in several forms, each with different words, structures, and messages. This shows a world where faith wasn't just passed down unchanged. People discussed and argued about what it meant, and their ideas were written into the texts themselves. The scrolls include not only scriptures, but also commentaries, laws, and community rules. Many of these show clear signs of editing over time. This challenges the idea that there was just one correct version of Scripture. It reveals a rich, ongoing process of religious thought during the Second Temple period. These scrolls open a window into how ancient people wrestled with questions of faith, law, and identity. Their answers were written down again and again as their world changed. Professor Mladen Popovic, head of the Qumran Institute at the University of Groningen, has led much of this groundbreaking research. His team combined artificial intelligence, carbon dating, and handwriting studies to date the scrolls more accurately and even identify individual scribes. He says these findings have completely changed the way we think about ancient Judaism and early Christianity. His work shows that both faiths started in a world full of different groups fighting for religious authority. By identifying the hands of individual scribes, even within one scroll, his team has brought us closer than ever to the people who wrote and shaped these texts. These discoveries don't just matter to scholars. They change how we all understand the roots of two of the world's most powerful religions and the people who helped shape them.